Well, welcome everybody. We're joined today by David Miller, a writer and broadcaster. David Miller is one of the world's leading academic experts in Islamophobia, propaganda, and the pro-Israel lobby. In October 2021, after a decade-long smear campaign against him by that same lobby, he was fired from his job as a professor of sociology by the University of Bristol. But now, more than 3 years on, an employment tribunal in Britain has ruled that his sacking was unlawful and violated his protected philosophical beliefs under British equality legislation, namely his opposition to Zionism, the Israeli state's racist foundational ideology. David, welcome back to the EI podcast. First time on the live stream.
Thank you very much, Issa. Good to see you all.
Yeah, great to be having another conversation with you. Well, first of all, congratulations on this hard-fought legal victory. We've got a short video clip here, which I would like to play.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy with that welcome. It's well deserved. And David, as you guys know.
Thank you, Tamara. That was a recent speaking event that you spoke at in Bristol at the Malcolm X Centre. Is that right?
On Sunday, just there. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So it was great to see that. Just people celebrating your legal win, and you know, this has been a hard-fought victory. You know, and it's taken a lot of fortitude really to get here. But tell us about the implications of this victory and how it, if it does, set a legal precedent for others.
Well, it's a tremendous victory for me personally. So the court determined that I was wrongly dismissed, that the university hadn't properly investigated the claims against me, hadn't investigated or taken on board the evidence I supplied. They hadn't properly evaluated that evidence, and therefore that I was wrongly dismissed. But the more significant part of the win is that the court determined that the reason I was sacked was not because I had upset some students, which is what the university said, but because of my anti-Zionist views. The university's witnesses in the end conceded that point in cross-examination. If I hadn't been an anti-Zionist, then the rest of the comments that I made, they said, wouldn't have wouldn't have ended in me being sacked. So it was clear that they themselves conceded that point, and that's what led to the court issuing the judgment that I had been sacked because of my anti-Zionist views, and this is the most important point, that anti-Zionist views were, to use the language from the Equality Act 2010, worthy of respect in a democratic society. And that's the legal test for whether a view should be protected in law. So it's now the case that you cannot discriminate against someone, you cannot sack someone or discipline someone for having anti-Zionist views, no matter how horrific you might or Zionists might think those views are. And that, of course, is a tremendous legal precedent for anyone in any kind of job in the UK, but also it drives a coach and horses all the way through the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, which of course is the Zionist entity's main weapon of choice for beating and bashing the Palestine solidarity movement. Because of course, if you recall, as I'm sure you do, Asa, there's one of the examples in there in the IHRA which says that it's potentially anti-Semitic to say that Israel is a racist endeavor. Now we can all say, yes, Israel is a racist endeavor, always was, always will be. And no one can say that's racist. The courts have declared that that is not a racist statement, as we all knew. But nevertheless, this is not something which the Zionist movement wants to hear, and that's why they're a little bit cross about it.
Yeah, David, I saw the Jewish Chronicles front page this last weekend. They were not very happy about it, to say the least. The Jewish Chronicle being an extremely pro-Israel newspaper in Britain, weekly newspaper, right-wing newspaper.
David, if I can add my congratulations to you. You I mean, just to recall, before you were fired, which I think was in October of 2021, so 3 years ago, or is that 2 years ago? More than 2 years ago.
Year and a half.
Time is doing strange things with our minds these days. Prior to that, there'd been a whole big smear campaign against you. Asa mentioned it being going on for years, but it was particularly intense at that time, and it involved the national and international media, and it was really driven by Israel lobby groups and particular individuals who ginned up this whole, if I may say, fake story that you were making Jewish students on campus feel unsafe with whatever comments they said you made or statements you made. And as we reported in November of 2021, the university actually, and this is Bristol University, your employer, actually commissioned 2 independent investigations, and both of them concluded that the charges of anti-Semitism against you were completely unfounded. But despite that, they went on and fired you based on completely bogus reasons. Notably, they didn't claim that they fired you for anti-Semitism, but as you said, the tribunal found that the real reason was your anti-Zionist views. Now, that's just a way to get to the question I want to put to you. For the past few years, you've insisted, and we've all insisted, that because Zionism is a political ideology, it's not a religion, it's not a personal identity, it's not an ethnicity, it is a political ideology that holds that Palestinians can and must be forcibly removed from their homeland so that Jewish settlers from all over the world can take their place. So it's optional. You know, your ethnicity, your race is not optional, but supporting this racist ideology is optional, and therefore we have a right to criticize it. But so there's been this effort by putting these students up to say, oh, David Miller hurt my feelings, to turn Zionism into a sort of identity like religion or like race, so that if you offend a Zionist, you're discriminating against them. What does this ruling do to that campaign on British and American campuses to try to convince people that Zionism is an identity that we have to respect and protect?
Well, it facially undermines it. I mean, at the level of employment law in the UK, you can now no longer say, you know, that this person's been racist against me because he's criticised Israel. It's no longer going to be available as the kind of strategy of choice which the Zionists can use. It's not going to stop them necessarily, but it's going to be clear that there's a distinction to be made between anti-Zionism, obviously, and anti-Semitism or racism. But I think also it's going to have a knock-on effect more widely. I mean, the universities are going to have to decide what they do now, because the UK courts have declared that effectively the IHRA is not on all fours with the law, and that's going to be very difficult. That's going to have to work its way through, and that working its way through will have implications not just at the national level in the UK, but internationally as well, in the US and indeed in everywhere else that the IHRA has been used as a weapon. So I'm very optimistic that this is the beginning of the end of the IHRA, actually. And of course, there's been some pushback against it before. Some universities have voted to reject it. But this really is a declaration in a court which can't really be countermanded. I mean, it's not really available to be countermanded. It's clear that anti-Zionism is a protected belief and is separate from anti-Semitism. And I can't see any way in which the courts can declare that's not the case. There's never been an example of protected beliefs being overturned like that in the court. So that's a really positive outcome. And this is, as people have been saying, this is a victory for all of us. And it's something which will then be there to protect all of us who are faced with the incessant lies that the Zionists like to spout.
And just a reminder for our viewers and listeners, the IHRA is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Jewish bigotry, and in its in its explanation of what is anti-Semitism, I believe 7 out of the 11 examples that they give are criticisms of Israel and its state policies. So it is really a weapon to silence critics of Israeli policy and of the Zionist political ideology. And
the definition has its roots with the Mossad. I mean, this is what people forget.
It was a Mossad-funded so-called research at the in Israel that led to the IHRA definition. We actually have an article about that from a few months ago at the Electronic Intifada. But I also say the IHRA, this so-called International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which has this very somber and serious-sounding name, is just an Israel lobby group. And it's made up.
It's not international.
Yeah, its members are Israel, the government of Israel, and Israel's closest friends in the world, so the United States and the EU. And there's been this big effort to push this so-called definition, to formalize it and adopt it in universities across the UK, across the United States, and in the rest of the European and settler colonial world. And so this, as David said, is really a setback to that effort.
Yeah. Next question for you, David, just to put this to you. One of the responses I've seen from the Zionists to your legal victory, I mean, apart from general outrage, and I believe this was in the Jewish Chronicle, was I think it was John Mann, who is this. He's a pro-Israel campaigner. Let's just put it like that for now. His response was, well, this is outrageous, this should be overturned. But also he was trying to argue that it could go both ways. And he said that, well, if anti-Zionism is a protected characteristic, then therefore so is Zionism. So is that the case in law? And what would your response be to those kind of arguments?
It's not the case in law just yet. It could be established in law, and this is what, for example, the silver lining, as the UK Lawyers for Israel put it, is that they think that they can now establish Zionism as a protected belief. That remains to be seen, and of course it would depend on the case that they brought and what kind of Zionism they wanted to define and how the court thought about it. So that there are questions about that. It's not clear to me how it helps them much, since Zionism is already protected throughout our society because of the way in which our societies operate. But I think there's another question about this, which is that John Mann, he was in the Jewish Chronicle, I think, at the weekend, as you were saying, is talking about how this decision needed to be reversed, and that Parliament should be looking at this. So essentially, John Mann is saying that he disagrees with the decision of the courts so much that he thinks that we should abolish the separation of powers and effectively introduce fascism just in order to reverse the decision in my case. Now, of course, that's a ludicrous way of seeing things, but it's not unrealistic that the government will start to do stuff in this area. Already we've had Kemi Badenoch, one of the government ministers, talking about this in a way which is fairly ludicrous. But let's remind ourselves that it wasn't just, as one of you said, Israel lobby groups which were attacking me, and there were a laundry list of Israel lobby groups which most people couldn't name if they were asked, because there were so many of them. But there was also people from Parliament. More than 100 members of the House of Lords and the House of Commons wrote a letter asking for me to be sacked. And there were debates in Parliament. There were questions in the House, etc. I was denounced as being, I think, Jacob Rees-Mogg denounced me as being peculiarly wicked for the comments that I had made. So there was a huge campaign against me, which of course was whipped up by the lobby and by the Zionist movement. And of course they will try and continue with this, as they're trying to continue with introducing a bill against BDS, and as of course they're trying to outlaw the waving of the Palestinian flag, or the use of the slogan "From the river to the sea." And we just saw yesterday in the UK, which I guess you will have seen in the news, that these 3 young women, one of whom is Palestinian from Gaza, convicted of a crime of terrorism for having on their backs during a demonstration in October and November last year the image of a parachute. And there's obviously an attempt to clamp down and to make it impossible to vocalize pro-Palestinian sentiment. But at the same time, of course, as all of us know, the whole world sees what's happening in Gaza. The whole world sees the endless procession of babies and children dragged from rubble, and everyone sees that Zionism is a genocidal ideology, and so that attempt to crack down is foundering on the fact that the whole world supports Palestine, with the exception, of course, of the countries in the West, and meaning their leaders. But the whole of public opinion supports Palestine, and that's a really difficult thing for them to manage. Just to give one example of that, let's remember that Elon Musk, who is now descending into the arms of the Zionists at a rate of knots. Remember, he said, look, that when he came back from seeing from Kibbutz Be'eri, seeing the stuff that the Israelis showed him, he said, "From the river to the sea is genocidal, and we will not have it on the platform." Well, has anybody been stopped from being on X as a result of using that? No, of course not, because they can't, because the whole world is using the slogan, because the whole world supports Palestine. So it's a real dilemma for them in that they're trying to clamp down, but it's not working.
Yeah, they're sort of almost shutting down. We're starting to see this process of Western society shutting down, Western governments shutting down their own systems, that potentially democratic systems, but internal systems, purely to defend Israel and Zionism. And these are contradictions that are being really heightened across the world during this genocide.
David, the attack on you and your defense is we hope a very significant turning point for free speech and academic freedom, and a real blow against the thuggery of the Israel lobby, a lobby you've done so much to expose in both your academic and journalistic work. But as we know, you are not alone in being under attack for your academic work, and all over the UK, Europe, particularly Germany, and the United States and Canada, we hear story after story of young academics, and not always young academics, sometimes quite established academics, and particularly Palestinian academics, come under attack just for being Palestinian, or for speaking out in support of Palestinian rights, or even for very legitimate academic research. We've seen now almost 10 years ago, Stephen Salaita was subjected to a similar smear campaign, and he was fired by the University of Illinois, and he's not alone either. So my question for you is, as an academic and someone who's been through this, what advice do you have for your fellow academics who may face this kind of smear campaign? How do we stand up to it?
Well, I think the key thing, and I don't think this applies just to academics, but it does apply to academics too. The key thing is to adopt a strategy of attack, of not apologizing, the key difference between what I did and what many of the people in the Labour Party did in the UK when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge. The strategy then was to apologize. Say, I'm terribly sorry, I've hurt your feelings, I didn't mean it. Maybe we can have a chat, maybe we can make things right. But that's a losing strategy, and that's what lost Jeremy Corbyn the leadership of the Labour Party, as of course Asa shows in his fantastic book on the topic. My strategy was to say, we do not compromise with the Zionists, because we cannot. This is a racist ideology, and it simply has to be defeated. And that seems to me it has to be the first point of any response to these kinds of criticisms. The second point, therefore, if you're going to do that, is to say you have to get support. And I've had tremendous legal support in court, and those of you who followed what happened in court and the amazing theatre of the cross-examination will already know that. But what I would say is that there are ways and means to support yourself. Make sure you get legal advice. Quite often, comrades don't think to get proper legal advice, and they lay themselves open. I'm not sure that those three women, those poor women, two of whom handed themselves in, who were found guilty just yesterday of terrorism charges, I'm not sure they had the most politically adept counsel. I wouldn't want to say anything bad about their lawyers, but you have to have decent lawyers who understand the politics, and you also have to have support. Now, of course, there are organisations that can support you. In the US, Palestine Legal, and in Europe, there's the European Legal Centre. In the UK, I've been supported by an organisation called the Left Legal Fighting Fund, which was created by Chris Williamson, the former MP, when he won a case against the Labour Party, and he put all the money, the damages, into starting that organisation. I'm a director of the company as well, and we've used that to try and help and defend individuals, people who've got issues like those women who've been convicted yesterday, problems with the police, or problems at their work. They can come to the Left Legal Fighting Fund. It's at fightingfund.org, and we may be able to help you and defend you. In my case, my legal fees all the way through this process amount to over £100,000. I mean, that really is a staggering sum of money. I could never have, obviously, having been put out of work, never have paid that. And we managed to pay. We haven't paid all of it yet. We've got £30,000 roughly outstanding, but we've paid a huge amount of it. And I've been kind of overwhelmed and inundated with support with that in the last 14 days. We've had 500 small donations from people, which have really pushed up the total of money that we've got. So I would say get help. There are organizations that can help you. We can run crowdfunders. You run them in secure processes where the Zionists can't cancel them. And all of that knowledge and skill of how to do that now exists in the EU, in the UK, and in the US. And I would really recommend that people do have proper legal and political support. And that's what I would say.
Yeah. Sound advice. Well, a final question. It's kind of a big question, but maybe you could talk about it a little bit. The last time you came on the podcast, I think, was shortly after your firing in 2021. And I recommend this to go back and watch this to all our listeners and viewers. If you haven't seen it or heard it already, I think it was a really insightful conversation. There's a full transcript actually on that page as well. And in that conversation, you emphasized the necessity of dismantling the ideology of Zionism. And you said, quote, the same way as we would talk about dismantling racism, racism is not just a set of ideas, it has material, forms, and practices. If you want to dismantle and eradicate Zionism, you have to dismantle the apparatus which puts it in place. Could you talk about the material role that you think we've seen the Zionist movement in Britain play in the genocide in Gaza that we've seen since the 7th of October in regard to that? I mean, I suppose one maybe very small example is Sabrina Miller, the woman who really kicked off the witch hunt against you really at Bristol University. She was kind of the cat's paw for the Israel lobby in a way. And, you know, she wasn't even your student. But she really, there was lots of others who campaigned against you, but she was one of the more vocal ones. And today, I mean, that really kicked off her career. And today she has a successful career writing for the right-wing media, and was even astonishingly given the job of reporting on your legal victory for the Daily Mail. And she didn't disclose any of this.
With no disclosure of the role she played, posing as, and I want to come back to this, posing as a poor, vulnerable, young woman who was so deeply hurt by, all the awful things that David Miller supposedly said. And I just think it's so important to highlight that this is the strategy of putting students or alleged students, because she may have been a student at Bristol, but she wasn't your student, David, putting young people forward on campuses and saying, oh, look how their feelings are being hurt by all these awful things you're saying about Israel. But as Asa says, she went on to work for one of the most racist, Islamophobic, right-wing media outlets on the planet, the Daily Mail, and has been utterly ruthless. There is nothing emotionally vulnerable about her. She is a ruthless agent of anti-Palestinian propaganda. Maybe you won't say.
Yes.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah, but that's my view. I speak for myself.
So yeah, look, I mean, that's a very big question, as you said, and really we need another whole episode of a podcast in order to deal with this properly. But let me deal with it in summary terms. I'll maybe give a structural understanding and then give an example. So it seems to me that when Mearsheimer and Walt wrote their famous book, The Israel Lobby, in whenever it was, 2005 or 6 or whatever it was, what they think of as the Israel Lobby, and actually what most people think of as the Israel Lobby, are the Israel lobby groups who are engaged in trying to influence policy. So in the US, APAC, in the UK, BICOM, or the Conservative Friends of Israel, or the Labour Friends of Israel, etc. And now, of course, they are the Israel Lobby, and there's many more groups that are also part of that. In Mearsheimer and Walt's book, they talk about the neocon and Zionist think tanks, the FDD, the WINEP, etc., etc. JINSA, there's another one. And of course, you can think of the same thing here, the Policy Exchange, the Henry Jackson Society. That's the Israel Lobby. But then there's the Zionist movement, which is a much, much broader thing, including huge numbers of organizations. In the US, for example, if you look at the lobbying disclosure register, you see that AIPAC spent last year or the year before $2.7 million, and people say, the Zionists say, oh, shows that the Israel lobby is not very important. The National Association of Realtors spent way more. But then if you look at the data compiled for that book, Big Israel, which is all held on the israellobby.org archive, they've done a compilation which is not even the full magnitude of the Zionist lobby, and it shows that in 2020 the budget of the Israel lobby was $6.3 billion for that 1 year. So that's a little bit more than $3 million. But the other thing to say about that is that that's not the full extent of the influence of Zionism in our societies. Now, there's two other ways of looking at this, it seems to be. One is the way in which Zionists are lodged throughout the power structure of the society, not just in lobby groups, but in Whitehall, Westminster, or in the State Department, or in the Department of Defense in the US, and they're lodged at a level which is far in excess of, for example, the level of in the population of Jews in the US, which is around 3%, or in the UK, which is around 0.5%. That's another key way in which Zionism has an influence. It's the embeddedness of Zionists at the top levels, in journalism, in politics, in policy making. And there's a fourth way in which the Zionists have an influence, which is through corporations. And at the meeting I was at on Sunday, the rapper Loki was there talking about his research, especially on companies like Oracle and a whole slew of Israeli tech companies, most of which have got senior people from Unit 8200, which of course is the signals intelligence unit of the Israeli military. And that's another way in which the Israeli state is able to penetrate the politics of the UK or the US. The example he used at the end there was the question of Oracle, run by this guy called Larry Ellison, who lent $1 billion to Elon to buy Twitter. And they have this massive $1 billion contract, more than a $1 billion contract, to manage all the cloud services of the Ministry of Defense, the National Health Service, and the Foreign Office in this country. Now, that's a real national security risk and threat, but it's a way in which the Zionists are able to penetrate the most secret parts of the British state. And now people don't understand really the full range of ways in which the Zionists are able to influence and infiltrate. And that's the structural question I would give you. Now, let me give you one example of how this all works out in terms of the genocide. So I've been doing stuff recently on the show that I produce and appear on called Palestine Declassified, which has looked at, for example, there's two British charities, one called Beit Halachim, and the other one's called the UK Friends of the Association for the Wellbeing of Israel Soldiers, which is the UK wing of an organization which in the States is called Friends of the IDF. Now, they send millions of pounds every year to the IDF for mobile synagogues and gyms and new swimming pools, and they have a festival with 30,000 IDF recruits at it every year. To welcome, it's a music festival to welcome recruits, including those lone soldiers who come from the US or South Africa or the UK, whatever, to join the genocidal forces. This is a massive subvention for the genocide. So there are organizations here that are doing that, and they are regulated in the UK by charity law, which is supposed to show public benefit, and that if there are harms which come from their conduct, the harms must not outweigh the benefits. So there's a real sense of the importance of looking at the way in which Zionism operates in the UK and in the US and in other countries, because it's a key pillar of supporting the ongoing genocide, and we can take action against those organizations here. And I'll give you one example of how we could take action. The guy who runs Beit Halochem is a guy called Andrew Wolfson, from the famous philanthropic family, the Wolfson family, known for generations for their philanthropic work and the funding of Wolfson College, Cambridge, and Wolfson College, Oxford, but also for multi-generations, they've been supplying money for the ethnic cleansing in Palestine, and they continue to do it to very many organizations, including, yes, the IDF, but also directly to settlements and to Jewish supremacist groups and all sorts of other things. So there's a real sense of the importance of understanding not just Zionism in occupied Palestine, but the way in which Zionism in this country helps to facilitate and promote the genocide, and helps to keep and insulate it from criticism. And we should be taking action directly against that in each country that we live in.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, it's, as you said, it's a huge question, and we should have a whole podcast on it, and maybe we can get you back on soon to talk about some more of those things. We really appreciate your time, David. Thanks for joining us once again. You can follow David on X, formerly Twitter, at tracking_power, and watch his show Palestine Declassified on Press TV. It's a great show. I've been on it. Have you got anything else to plug?
No, that's all for the show. I mean, I think the key thing is to say, I still have legal fees outstanding. So if people can, then any contribution is welcome at fightingfund.org.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, David.
Thanks so much, David.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.